Let's talk about blogging and SEO. In other words, blogging, using blogging to drive traffic to your TPT store and using search engine optimization to help your audience find your blog. And we have special guest Jessica Devault from the Gift of Gab on the show today. She's going to be sharing her blogging wisdom from years of hosting a blog and driving traffic to her TPT store. She's going to be talking about things like how to make your blog stand apart from other bloggers, how to choose topics for your blog, and how to make sure that your blog posts are search engine optimized. I cannot wait for you guys to meet Jessica. Hey, Jessica, how are you?
Hey, Lauren, I'm great. I'm so excited to be here today.
I'm so excited to have you. I'm excited to talk blogging and SEO, both of which are something that I know nothing about. So I'm going to learn a lot this conversation, that's for sure. Can you just start by telling us a little bit about you? Because when we were looking for presenters for Teacher Seller Summit, you were one of the applicants. We were blown away with the topic that you were going to present on and all of your talking points. We were so excited to have you. But prior to that, I didn't know who you were, which is not a surprise because I don't know much about the blogging world. So can you tell everybody a little bit about you?
Yeah. Okay. My name's Jessica, and I am a speech language pathologist. So that is my entry into the teaching world. So I taught in a public school for a few years. I'm in Texas. And so I taught for a few years there. And then I got pregnant and I started having babies. And I had another friend who was kind of in the same boat. She was teaching first grade at the time at our school. And she was like, hey, Jessica, you've got to try this teachers pay teachers thing. And I had zero knowledge on anything other than I knew I bought stuff from TPT and I liked it, but I didn't think of it as how can I make money? How do I make resources? No clue. And she was really encouraging in the process. She had stopped working to stay home with her babies, and that was a goal of mine. And so that was really what kind of intrigued me about all of that. So long story short, I ended up staying home when my babies were really little, and I did some TPT part-time and I did some mom stuff, and I work at a private school now. So I work a couple days a week at a private school. I do TPT in between, and then I do the stay-at-home mom, work from home mom stuff all mixed up with that.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot on your
Yes,
plate. Lots to
it
juggle.
is.
So talk to me about where blogging came into the picture for you.
Don't exactly remember. It was kind of a mess because I had no clue at all what I was doing. I just knew it was something I needed to do. It was something that the expert said I needed to be doing. And so I did my best just to patch together a blog. I've always enjoyed writing. I've always been, I think, is a pretty good writer. It's a strength for me. And so I just had fun with it. And I really enjoyed that aspect before I ever even thought about it giving me more income or driving people to my business. I just kind of did it because people said I needed to. And now that I've been doing it for a while, I can see the benefits of how it's drawn people into my business as well.
So you applied to teach SEO, blogging, all of that. Where does that come into play with what you do in your business now? Do you help other teacher entrepreneurs learn how to blog? Do you do that? Or is this out of the goodness of your own heart, you're like, hey, I've learned so much. I want other people to learn this too.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just something that I like to do. I like to teach in any way that it comes across my path. I like presenting. I like podcasts. I like teaching my students. And so this just kind of seemed like a cool opportunity to get to teach other people some new skills, to teach a new thing I've never taught before. And as a teaching junkie, that's always fun to try to okay, how am I going to spin this to help somebody learn this topic that I know how to do?
I like that. I think it's so fun because we get a great mixture of people, but for the most part, usually when people are presenting, they have a reason for presenting. And I say a reason almost like it's a bad thing, but it's not a bad thing at all. But basically, they have a business. They have some reason, something behind that. And so I think it's really neat when there are people who really just want to share out of the goodness of their own heart, share their knowledge. Because I would imagine when you first got started with blogging, it was pretty overwhelming. Yeah.
Yes. I didn't know what WordPress was. I didn't know what Squarespace was. I didn't know any of these things. I got what I thought was a WordPress site because everybody said WordPress. And I'm still going to mix this up because I don't know exactly what I'm talking about. But I believe there is WordPress.com and WordPress.org or some tiny little minute difference that I didn't know about. And I tried to get my blog redone because I was just building it in pieces. I was never really happy with how it looked. I wanted it to look really professional, like all of these big TPTers. And I couldn't get it to do what I wanted on my own. So I was like, okay, I finally am to the point where I am going to make a commitment and I'm going to hire somebody to rebrand everything for me and design my blog. And so she does all this stuff. It's beautiful. It feels like a ton of money to have it all done. And she goes to like upload it to my website and I had the wrong one. Whatever coding or things that she did not work with, I think I had WordPress.com. I'm really not sure. And so I spent all this money and she basically was like, can't help you. Like, you don't have the right kind of website. And she was like extremely unhelpful. I was like in tears. I was panicking because I had spent, probably $1,000 at least just trying to like do this. And she was starting to get really snippy and frustrated with me. And I ended up finding somebody else, the VA TPT group on Facebook. And I was like, please, I need help. It's Pitch Clips. I can't remember what her name is right now, but Pitch Clips is her company. And so she was like, immediately, let me help you. I can fix this. And so she for me. So now I have whatever the legit WordPress blog is, and it's beautiful. And she redesigned it for me. So,
well, we're going to have to find out what the legit one is so we can make sure we get that.
It was
terrifying. No, you're totally good.
Yeah.
So I don't do any blogging, like I said before. This is one of those things that every time we have somebody on the podcast that talks about blogging, or anytime I hear someone, I'm like, yes, it sounds like a great thing. Like, this sounds like something I should be doing. But, for the reasons that you just mentioned, of it kind of taking a little bit to get started, it kind of hinders me from going down that path. Let's kind of talk about that for a second. Does this have to be complicated? Does this have to be quote unquote right when you first start?
That's the beauty of a blog, is you can always go back and edit and change things, or you just keep adding new content as you learn. And so if older stuff doesn't do great, then redo another blog post on the same topic and do better this time, or go back and edit the one you started and make it better. So it's very easy to go back and fix mistakes, or just to clean it up, or to do a little better. It's very helpful that way.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. So your specialty is kind of SEO with blogging, which actually I get asked two questions a lot, neither of which I know the answer to. The first is, what do I blog about? The second is search engine optimization. So can you talk me through that a little bit? Which comes first, the chicken or the egg, when we're talking about search engine optimization and choosing what you're going to blog about? Are we going on Ubersuggest, say, and looking for popular keyword search terms and trying to figure out what we should blog about that has to do with those keyword search terms? Or are we choosing our topic based on what we feel like is going to be best for our audience, and then figuring out how to keyword optimize it?
Okay, so I'll tell you kind of my process. I always had like a thing on TPT since I started, and I've always wanted to either create something for a specific problem that I have seen, or for a specific student that I have taught. And so I may look on TPT and I can't find exactly what I'm wanting. And so I'm like, I'm going to create this. So that has always been kind of like my trigger point for my ideas, and where I'm starting on my resources is usually a specific student or a specific problem I am facing in my speech room. So from there, I create the resource. Then from there, it's part of kind of my whole process is I will go and make the blog post about resource after it's posted, which will then direct people back to the resource. So I always start with a specific problem, then I go into blogging about that. So I feel like if you went into Ubersuggest first and you just started looking for keywords, you might be hitting things that are too broad. You might be hitting things that somebody doesn't really need, unless you already know what the need is going to be. So I always say just start with the need and then work your way down to the blog at the end.
Because then, even in my mind, even if it's not as popular of a search term, at least the value is going to be there for the person who's reading it.
Right.
So how do we search engine optimize something? So I've chosen a topic. I've said, okay, partner work in 8th grade math classroom, something like that, right? How do I then search engine optimize that? How do I make sure that people are going to find that blog post?
Well, there's a few steps to kind of doing that. One of the things that is going to be most important, and the very first thing to consider, is your user experience. You're going to want to make sure that the actual post itself is fun and engaging to read, that somebody's going to read it and they're going to be hooked. What I do first is I write the whole blog post out. I know I can be myself, I can be authentic, and I can write the post, and then I go back in and I start trying to optimize for SEO. So once you start getting, you've got the blog post written, you're going to want to go back and then pick your keyword. So the keyword is just going to be basically, what is this blog post about? If I were typing this into Google looking how to teach nonverbal communication or something like that, that's going to be your keyword. And that's when you're going to go into somewhere like Uber Suggest, and you're going to type it in and kind of get those different ideas of different ways you could reword that keyword, or different ways that you could say that same thing. And you're going to go back and you're going to weave that keyword into where it fits naturally in that blog post you've already written, because you don't want it to sound spammy. You don't want it to sound like you're trying too hard, like you're trying to optimize. You just want to look for those places where it just fits in really nicely. Yeah. After we kind of do the keyword research, you want to go in, and some of the other things about SEO are making sure that you have links going, in outside, like maybe to TPT, where you're linking out to that resource, and you have other links in your blog that are connecting that resource maybe to something similar, or that blog post to another similar blog post. Making sure that you have that user experience of sending people to where they want to go and helping them find what they need and what they want.
When you're talking about the linking to and from, so like linking one blog post to the next, linking that blog post to your TPT product, which I have a follow-up question for that one. So if I forget, remind me that I have a question about linking to your TPT product. Is all of that helping with SEO? I've heard people talking about like backlinking, which I don't know exactly what that is, but is that part of that?
Yes, that is both part of SEO, and it's part of that user experience, and it's part of helping people just find more of your stuff. But yes, it is part of the SEO as well.
So my follow-up question for linking to your TPT product, because this is a question that I have been asked a lot. So I do a lot of TPT store audits, and whenever I go to like a product and say it's a $3 resource, something that should be a no-brainer type of purchase, right? I can scroll down, and maybe like in the middle of the product description, sometimes a person will have a link to a blog post. Now, obviously, this is against TPT's terms of use, but taking that out of the equation, how do you feel about linking to a blog post from a TPT product? Yes or no?
I would say it would depend on the resource, and it would depend on the blog. If it is a resource that needs a little bit of explanation as to why this is so amazing, or something that you can't just glean from the preview or the description, then you could send it back to a blog post and explain in that blog post, here's why this resource is amazing. Here's what I'm doing for you. Here's what you're going to get. Here's all of the benefits. Again, barring the terms of use thing.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously I'm not going to tell somebody to violate TPT's terms of use, but I'm also not the TPT police.
Right.
So basically what you're saying is if a product has a low conversion rate, it has a good view to preview ratio, but then that preview to purchase is off, and somebody's looked at your previews and they've said, yeah, your preview looks as good as it's going to get, but this conversion rate is still low, but you have a blog post that's converting really well for that exact same product, that's when you would consider, TPT's terms of use aside, that's when you would consider linking to the blog post to send them there. Okay.
Yes.
So I agree. Part of my job is to tell people, well, that's against TPT's terms of use. But then on the whole, in general, my general advice is usually to tell them probably not. If this is a no-brainer type of product, you probably don't need to be taking traffic away from somebody who's this close to your add to cart button. But I really like that perspective of, if the product isn't doing well on its own, needs additional explanation, your blog post is really doing your product a service, then that could really be helpful. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's say that I wake up tomorrow morning and I'm like, okay, I'm going to start my blog. I'm going to do this. I'm finally going to take the plunge. I'm going to take all of those old emails that I have, and I'm going to turn them into blog posts. All this other content that I've got, I'm going to turn them into blog posts. And I know how to get the SEO for it. Now, how do I make my blog stand out? Because, and you and I were talking about this before, where you said you've had this question a lot from people who are maybe in a saturated niche, or they just don't want it to be just another blog, right? They want their blog to stand out, be unique to them, be unique to their brand, and offer unique value to their customers. How do we do that?
One of my favorite things about my blog is that it is, I feel like, my chance to be me. And so when somebody comes to my blog, they really get to feel like they are interacting with me. They are talking to me, they are hearing my stories, they are seeing my experiences, they're hearing my voice. And so that is key to having a successful blog that stands out, is letting yourself really come through so that you can build that trust factor so that you can get people to be like, okay, she's in the trenches with me. I have this problem. She's got this problem. And so you kind of feel like a camaraderie and a bond. And so what I feel like the most important thing for getting your blog to stand out is to just really be authentic, be yourself as you're typing. That's why I said the very first thing I do is I just type it out like I am talking to you or like I'm telling a story so that it can really be my voice. The next thing that I would suggest doing to kind of help it stand out is to make sure that your images are really good. Sometimes that's easy to overlook, and that is something that takes a lot of practice to get better at. I still feel like I'm getting better. I just went like on my covers on TPT, I updated all of them this summer, and I'm now looking at them and I'm like, I don't like it. Like, I need to redo it. So it kind of feels like that sometimes, like constantly tweaking and getting better. But that visual appeal and making sure you have really good visuals to go kind of with your authentic personality are going to really help kind of make your blog stand out and look better. I know that a lot of people hire out VAs for blogging. That's something that I've never really understood for myself and for my business, because I feel like my blog is such an extension of myself that I feel like if somebody else came in, that taking my space. And so that's what I think is really cool about the blog, again, is just like making sure it's a place where people get to know you and kind of relate to you. And that's how you're going to stand out, versus if you get a really salesy, nondescript, bland, boring, perfectly SEO'd, but boring blog post, it's not going to convert as well for you as one that's got a really strong hook at the beginning that's going to pull people in, and one that tells a lot of stories so that people remember you. Those are the things that make you stand out, is grabbing their attention and then helping them to remember who you are.
You know, when you were talking about showing your personality and being your authentic self, I remember way back in the day, probably in like 2016, 2017, when I was first getting started on Teachers Pay Teachers, Casey Morris had her YouTube channel. And I don't know if anybody listening or if you, Jessica, watched her way back then. Her videos are something now that she looks back on, and I've heard her say she's embarrassed by them a little bit. You know, she had like the little squeaky voice coming in there, and it was like really, you know, silly. Or she would do like the little sound effects, like the slow-mo kind of thing, like this is silly stuff. And I didn't really think very much about it back then, but now kind of reflecting back on, that was her personality. Like that was kind of some of her silliness kind of coming out, and it did make her seem more personable, and it made her seem more relatable. To me, it built that know, like, and trust factor without me even realizing it. And so even just something as simple as inserting your corny math puns or your science puns or your little dad jokes or whatever into your blog can be something that, like, if it's a part of your personality and you're not necessarily a storyteller, like some people aren't, just putting in those little things that are you and that are a part of you can be so impactful in ways that the people who are reading don't even realize that it's impacting them.
And that's why, again, I think it is so important just to sit down and write before you worry about the SEO, because when you just sit and write, your personality is just going to come out, because that's what's going to happen. If you get all worked up about SEO from the beginning, you're going to change what you want to say and it's not going to be the same. You can still get the SEO in and still have it sound authentic.
I love that. So we've talked about like how to create this space, this blog space where your community and your audience can get to know, like, and trust you. And we've talked about how to choose your blog topics based on what your audience needs. Write the blog and then go back and figure out how to search engine optimize it. Then go back and pick those keywords. Let's talk about for a second how we're selling products within these blogs. Are you selling a product in every blog? Are we linking to a product in every single blog post that we do? Or do we have sales specific blogs, like blog posts that are just salesy, blog posts that are just informational? Tell me a little bit about that. What kind of balance do you strike?
Okay, that's a great question. When I first started, my goal was to have a blog post for every resource in my store. It's not happened because I am the kind of person who gets a bunch of ideas and I get really excited about them, and I just like to run with whatever I'm excited about at that time. And so, yes, like I said, I do like to have blog posts that specifically go to resources. That is my number one kind of marketing thing, because I do ultimately, that is how it brings me in revenue, is to sell from my blog. I sometimes do email opt-ins on my blog. I use that to collect email addresses. I'm not as good with that as I would like to be, or as I probably should be, but that would be another type of blog. It's very similar to writing a blog for a resource. You just create something and you set it all up to go to your email, kind of like a freebie thing. The other thing is, since I am still teaching and I'm still working, is I get a million ideas when I'm working with my students, and I'm like, this is genius, I have to share this. And so, like, for example, last summer, I was really into like, how can I make a bunch of movement activities for my students using pretty generic things that most of us have in our classroom, or if we just buy, say, a scooter board, how many different activities can we do with this scooter board? And so I did a YouTube series on it, and then I made an email opt-in, and then I did like a blog series on it as well. Originally, like, the idea is when I come up with something really cool and exciting, or I just want to share it on my blog, things that aren't always going to go back to my store. Like, I really just want that user experience to be good, where people, again, start to trust me. They start to see my style, my teaching style, so that they know here's an activity that you can use to teach social skills with this book and these toys that I've created myself that you can go buy on TPT. So I guess it does kind of go together, but I don't always have, I guess, that perfect link back from fun ideas, teaching ideas that always leak back to TPT to answer that question. But I try to.
Yeah.
The goal is to try to.
I love that. So, and ultimately, the goal is to grow your business and to drive traffic to your TPT store. So it makes sense that that would be the primary focus for your blog post, would be to do that. So I love that. Let's say that somebody's on the fence and they're like, yeah, I know I probably need to start a blog, like at some point, kind of like myself. What to you, like when you think about like how this has impacted your business, like when you look back on this, and if you hadn't had your blog, where would your TPT business be now versus with your blog?
So as I was getting ready, as I've been working on this presentation for the Seller Summit, I went back and I was like, how much of my earnings comes from my blog? And I don't know what is considered a good number, or, if I'm up there with people who are doing really great at it, or maybe I'm not as good as I think, but I am making, on average, 5% of my earnings come from my blog. Some posts convert better than others. Some months it's closer to like 11% of my earnings come from my blog. Some months it's less. So I took an average of 5%. And it doesn't really sound like a lot until you break down those numbers. And so you're like, okay, like, I don't have them all in front of me and I'm not a math person, but 5% of 100 is $5. Whoop-de-doo. But that's coffee at Starbucks for that month. And that's where that's where I started. Like, my goal was just to buy my coffee at Starbucks. So, okay, I gave myself a Starbucks this month. But then as you get higher and higher up, 5% becomes $1,000. 5% becomes $500,000. Like, that's a lot of money as you scale and as your business grows. So for one, like, just that 5% of my earnings is great. The other thing that is really great is the conversion rate for my blog is also much higher than Pinterest. Is non-existent as far as like conversion for sales, pretty much for me. YouTube and my blog are my two biggest, like, have the best conversion for sales for my store. So they kind of go back and forth depending on it. But that would be the other thing, is when they get to my blog and when they come back to my store, the chances of them buying are much higher. So those two things, just that percent of my income itself and then the conversion, are what make it such a great mover and helping people to find your stuff and get to your store.
And there are two other ways that that's impacting your income that we can't even measure, right? And the first is that the more you sell of that product, the higher it ranks in the TPT search engine. And so it kind of impacts it in that way. And also, I mean, there's this whole conversion. We were having this conversation last night in RTA in one of our groups that was meeting about conversion rate and the role that it plays. And I know TPT is saying like, oh, you know, conversion rate from outside traffic does not impact your search engine ranking. I don't believe that to be true at all. There's no way that's true, but they can't tell us otherwise. Like if they told us otherwise, we would stop driving traffic, especially paid ad traffic. But what they have said definitively is that any sales that are coming to your product are going to help your search engine ranking. So we know that that's the case. So if we're talking about conjecture on my part, if we're talking about that blog traffic that's coming in, bringing in a high conversion rate for those products, theoretically, in my mind, that's going to help boost your search engine rankings. But then the other thing that you can't measure is that the number of people who go to purchase from your store and seek you out directly on TPT because they know you from your blog.
Yeah.
And so we can't track that kind of traffic. Well, and I said two, there's really the third one as well, which is that, and this one's a little bit more measurable, is that you're using your blog to grow your email list, and email converts. I don't know for you if this is true, but on average, email converts better than any form of online marketing. So with that, all of those pieces together can significantly impact your income. And it's like you said, 5% doesn't sound like a lot, but to me, that's 5% of traffic coming from a source that is passive, which is a really big deal. And so even though it's just 5%, 5% of $100,000 a year is $5,000. That's $5,000 that you earned. I'm not going to say doing nothing, but potentially continues to build on each other, and you get to take breaks. You get to not touch your blog for a little bit. You're not having to like pay for advertisements to get that traffic to your TPT store. And so the fact that it's passive counts for a lot.
Yes. And that actually is one of my rules for myself, and like boundaries that I set very early in the beginning was I had, like I said, little babies at home. And I tried to get into like the whole Instagram thing, because this was like 2017, 2018. It was a really big deal. People were like, this is amazing. Like I get so much traffic and so many sales. And I just found myself constantly sucked in, not getting a great return. Like to get a great return required so much time on my phone and on my screen that it became not worth it, because it put me in a bad headspace. It put me in just a bunch of different things. And I said, okay, I am only going to focus on things that can run themselves while I'm not there. And that was, again, one of the reasons that the blog worked so great for me. And so I focused SEO, I focused on the blog, and I focused on the YouTube channel. And then I do my email list as well. And I don't touch social media. Like I don't even have accounts, because it just doesn't work for me. And I feel like I do okay without those things, because again, that passive income and being able to take a break has been helpful.
I love that. So where is your blog? Where can the listener find you?
Yes, it is at the Gift of Gab, I'll say that is my TPT name. I had to put dashes in it because there are a lot of the Gift of Gabs out there. So it's the gift of gab.com.
I love it. I love it. So I'm super, super excited for your Teacher Seller Summit presentation. Can you tell us a little bit about what someone could expect, an attendee could expect to learn when coming to your presentation?
So obviously, one of the things we're going to focus on is SEO. I want to dive into that a little bit more specifically than we did today, kind of going into the details of all of the good aspects of SEO, checklist of things that you should make sure each blog post has to make sure it is SEO optimized. I want to talk a little bit more about writing authentically, selling through a blog post in a way that doesn't sound salesy, that doesn't feel forced, that just sounds really natural. And I want to walk through creating a blog post with me. So I just did one for an email opt-in, and I just kind of took screenshots along the way of here's where I started and here's where we ended up, so that everybody can kind of see that process, and I guess kind of how I think through things to hopefully help them think through some things as well.
I love that. I'm so, so excited. So you're not on social media, but we can find you at the-gift-of-gab.com.
Yes.
Which the link is in the description. So, And then you're on TPT as the Gift of Gab as well, right?
TPT is the Gift of Gab, and I am on YouTube as the Gift of Gab Speech Therapy. And then I also have a book on Amazon called Devin Makes a Friend. So those are all of
Oh,
the places.
I love that. So thank you so much for being here, Jessica. And we can't wait to see you at Teacher Seller Summit. And then, of course, on your YouTube channel and your blog as well.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun.
If you want to connect with Jessica and check out her blog, you can find a link to her blog, her YouTube channel, and everything else down inside of the show notes. You can also meet her at Teacher Seller Summit, where, as she mentioned before, she's going to be talking all about getting your blog started, start to finish, and getting your blog post search engine optimized. You do not want to miss that. You can find the link to join us for Teacher Seller Summit inside of the description. Do not miss it. All right. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and subscribe. I put out weekly content for teacher entrepreneurs, helping you grow your business in a way that's purposeful and sustainable. And you don't want to miss any of these videos, especially the incredible interviews that we have coming up with many of the incredible presenters at Teacher Seller Summit. And you don't want to miss that. So be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video.